see, the book was copyright back in 1971, 72 or something like that I read the book. Thought the guy that wrote it had to be an absolute fruitcake and totally off the wall. The things that I read just absolutely couldn't exist. And anybody that would say things like this really, I wondered about. Over the years, I've begun to change my mind. I may not totally agree with everything that is said in the book, but I'll guarantee you I've given it a second thought. The little book that I read several years ago was called None Dare Call It Conspiracy, and it was written by Gary Allen and Larry Abraham. Conspiracy. Anytime you say it, it makes the hair rise up on the back of a good liberal journalist. I looked it up in the dictionary. Conspire. To join in a secret agreement to do an unlawful or wrongful act, or to use such means to accomplish a lawful end. To act in harmony toward a common end. Larry Abraham, who was one of the writers of None Dare Call It Conspiracy, has come out with a brand new book that is out in hardback, and he has dropped part of the title and simply has said, call it conspiracy. Let me give you just a few of the, let me give you a few of the titles of the chapters. One of them is Don't Confuse Me with Facts. Chapter 2, Socialism, Royal Road to Power for the Super Rich. Number 3, The Money Manipulators. Number 4, Bankrolling the Bolshevik Revolution. Number 5, Establishing the Establishment. Number 6, The Rockefellers and the Reds, and so on and so on. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is good to have you today, and my guest on Points of View is Mr. Larry Abraham. He is co-author with Gary Allen of a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy, and his new book out, as I mentioned, is called Call It Conspiracy. Larry, how are you? Hello. Okay, we got him up now. Hello, Larry. There we go, Larry.
Yes, sir.
Okay, here we go. We got you going now. How are you today?
Well, I'm fine. It's a pleasure to be on your program.
It's a delight to have you. You wrote a book called, along with Gary Allen, you wrote a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. How did that come about?
Well, Marlon, that's an interesting story. What had happened there is that when I came out of college, I was a convinced elitist liberal because that was the educational environment that had been prepared for me. To give you some idea where my thinking was, my heroes philosophically were people like Lord Bertrand Russell, economically John Maynard Keynes and John Kenneth Galbraith. A little-known Harvard professor by the name of Kissinger was I thought, the guy that knew all that was worth knowing in foreign policy.
Okay.
And then I started to become concerned because I started seeing contradictions. The contradictions were that if socialism was as I had been told it was in college, that is a economic system from each according to his ability to each according to his need. In other words, you have a great big pie and you count heads and you divide it up equally. I was perplexed by the fact that some of the wealthiest people in the world were constantly promoting socialism, and that didn't square with logic. And so I started to do some investigations of it, and being a student of history, I was aware of the conspiracies in ancient Greece and Rome, and in the Renaissance period, in the Italian city-states. And so I started to dig into that subject, and the more I dug, the more eye-opening it became. And then, to jump ahead, I started in 1968 to give about a 4-hour lecture on the subject of contemporary conspiracy. And Gary Allen, whom I knew well at the time, said to me, he said, well, why don't we turn that into a book? And so we took the transcript of that lecture and fleshed it out and added the documentation, and it became None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And the rest, as they say, is history. The little book took off like a rocket, and we ended up selling or distributing somewhere between 4 and 5 million copies of that book.
All right, let's go back. Larry, the book was called A Conspiracy. The thing that you brought out, the thing that you turned up was something that is very difficult for us to compute. And you call it in chapter number 2 of the new book, as well as the old book, Socialism, Royal Road to Power for the Super Rich. Now, when we think about Marxism or communism, we don't think of an international banker.
That's true.
Now, how did you come to these conclusions?
Well, because you have to come to understand that socialism, as it has been presented, is a con. In other words, socialism is not a movement of downtrodden masses rising up against exploiting bosses and then having an economic system where everybody shares equally. If you take a look at the world today, the only governments in the world that actually are socialist, and they call themselves socialist, are such things as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Democratic Socialist Republic of Germany, the Democratic Socialist Republic of Vietnam, etc. And what you come to know, and it's really logical if you think about it, the struggle in the world is not between capitalism or no capitalism or socialism or communism. The struggle is who controls the capital. In Economics 101, we were taught that all items fall into one of two categories. Either it's a capital good or a consumer good. A capital good is a machine that produces a consumer good. A sewing machine is a capital good. The suit that it produces is a consumer good. So what you've got here is the control of capital. The classic definition of socialism is state ownership and control of the means of production, distribution of goods, and allocation of services. So if the state controls the economy, then what you quickly find out, as I did in my investigations, was that socialism is being promoted by super-rich monopolists who don't like competition. In fact, it was John D. Rockefeller himself who once referred to competition as a sin against God. He saw competition as a disorganized, confused economic condition that he wanted to help do away with it.
Let me read you something, Larry, that came out in Dallas Morning News today, okay? It's written by Robert Reno, economics editor of Newsday. It says here, corporations have in history proved to be effective instruments for the creation of wealth, and so this is judged to be one of their beneficial functions. But corporations of increasing size also become awesome concentrations of power. The pretense that the power of corporations is vested in shareholders is increasingly hollow. Or as John Kenneth Galbraith suggests, the corporations, far from being the chief bastions against socialism, are becoming increasingly socialistic institutions, progressively isolated from the owners of capital, the shareholders, and even from their supposed trustees, the board of directors. It is entirely possible that what we are seeing created in this process of accelerated corporate expansion are creatures of a radically new nature. They are so vast as to mock all notions that they are controlled by their owners, so central to the function of the economy that they inevitably become extensions of government policy, so powerful they become increasingly indistinguishable from and collaborated with the state. As Galbraith suggests, modern socialism is not the work of politicians or college professors. It's the accomplishment of corporation executives and those to whom they owe money.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I think that's a very, very good assessment. Let me back it up just a little bit. We all studied in our history books such institutions as the Hudson's Bay Trading Company or the East Indian Trading Company. What were those? Those were crown-granted sovereign business enterprises, right?
Monopolies.
Monopoly.
Yeah.
And in fact, the corporation exists because of a license granted it by the state. I mean, if you want to go into business as an incorporation, even just say yourself and your wife, you have to file the papers for incorporating. You have to get a corporate tax number. The limited liability aspects of corporations are the creation of the state. So when Marx referred to capitalism, he was referring to the state-created and state-protected monopolies, which he said must ultimately give way to state control. He was right in that sense, because today, major multinational corporations of the type that the writer of that piece you just quoted was referring to become so merged with government interests that it's almost impossible to tell them apart.
Chrysler Corporation.
Chrysler Corporation, a classic example.
You got here. I would say Ali Iacocca is very comfortable with very big government.
He's not only comfortable with it, he owes his very existence to it. Because if we're no big government in a position to grant Mr. Iacocca's Chrysler Corporation $1.5 billion guaranteed loans, there wouldn't be any Dodge or Chryslers today.
Okay, now somebody that's involved in this says that's okay, this is the way it is. We know better how to run this world, and yet a Larry Abraham comes along and says, in the boardrooms of the big corporations across America and the world, there's a tie into Marxism, socialism, China, USSR. It is a conspiracy, and it's bad. Why?
Precisely my point. And the reason I say it is bad is the following. If these people announce to the world their goals and said, okay, what we think is that we think we're able to manage the world in a much better fashion than it's currently being run today, and you folks are going to have to give up a certain measure of freedom, but in return for that certain measure of freedom, we will create a corporate state where everybody will have a house, a car, a chicken in the pot. Not to worry, folks, it's going to be wonderful.
Hang on to that. Let me take a break, all right?
All right.
And you're listening to Points of View.